If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at FitnessMama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Today's episode is all about postpartum aches and pains. So breastfeeding, soreness, we're going to be talking about recovery from birth, and this episode is with Jacqueline Kincer, and it's actually an episode where she was interviewing me from the Breastfeeding Talk Podcast. So be sure to check that podcast out. But in this episode, I discuss breastfeeding posture and setup. I discuss preventative strategies for aches and pains whilst breastfeeding. We talk about some things to look for and be aware of when feeling achy, and also some tips and tricks. And I know that postpartum is a period where there's a lot of adjustments. You know, you're learning how to look after a newborn, you're suddenly sleep deprived, you've got a new baby, so many things are happening. And often we tend to sort of ignore the aches and pains and niggles, and we just sort of hope they're going to get better. We put ourselves a little bit to the bottom of the to-do list just because we're trying to keep this newborn alive. So this episode is all about helping to fill up your bucket, helping to reinvest back into your body, which we all deserve after having a baby. Doesn't matter if you have a vaginal or a cesarean birth, your body has been through a lot. So I trust you'll find this episode helpful, especially if you're feeling achy and sore after birth, or perhaps after a breastfeed. You're thinking, oh, my neck's a bit sore, my shoulders are a bit sore. This episode is for you. Before we do dive into this episode, again, I do just want to thank you all for supporting this podcast along the way. And in fact, sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably the most important way to help this podcast reach more people. So if you have one pregnant friend, or a friend who's recently had a baby, or a family member who's just had a baby, please consider sharing this podcast with them to help them on their journey. Right, let's dive into this episode with Jacqueline.
Welcome to the show, Kath. I'm excited to have you here. Tell our listeners where you are and a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks so much, Jacqueline. It's so lovely to chat today. I am based in Melbourne, Australia. And yeah, as you said, I'm a physiotherapist. So I have clients and members who unfortunately have aches and pains after birth. And it's such a big thing, isn't it? It's really common. We go through pregnancy, our body changes. We then have our beautiful bub, you know, whether or not we have a cesarean birth or a vaginal birth. And then we're left breastfeeding, learning how to breastfeed, our body's recovering. We're suddenly spending hours in like one position trying to do this whole new thing. Like for me, I just remember it was just like, how do you do it? So yeah, massive learning curve. And unfortunately, our body is often sort of forgotten about because you're so focused on feeding your baby and getting the attachment and, you know, getting all those things happening, that when you finally look up, you think, oh, my neck's sore, oh, my shoulders, you know, so whether or not it's neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, wrist pain, it's really common. So
Yes.
Yeah, it's exciting to chat today.
Yeah. Oh gosh. There's so many things. And then not to mention like nipple pain or whatever else is going on, right? Recovery from the birth and all of that. So yeah, I think kind of what you said there in the beginning is that, you know, we're not prepared as moms for this stage, right? We don't know, like we know the baby's going to grow inside the body, right? We expect that baby will be uncomfortable. There's certain things that we're taught or that we learn or hear along the way, but I don't know that we're really like learning good, like body hygiene or if that makes sense. Like, what are some of the things that you see that, you wish maybe moms knew going into, becoming a mom through pregnancy? Like, what are those things that they could be doing, could be aware of, could be knowledgeable of during even pregnancy? Because it's not really part of the books or the classes.
And this is why I love talking about this stuff, because this is why I'm a physiotherapist. So I was seeing women one-on-one, face-to-face. And so many women, after they'd had their babies, would say, or even into menopause, into the 50s and 60s, would say, I wish I had known about this sooner. I wish I had done more sooner. And it's so true. There's this whole area of pregnancy where it's exciting because we can be more proactive. And at the moment, and I think there is a shift happening, which is exciting, because in the past, seeing a physio was very reactive. When you were achy and sore, then you'd go and book an appointment. Or if you had leaking and issues with incontinence, so leaking when you cough or sneeze, then you'd go and think, oh, I need to do something about this. Whereas as we're getting more knowledge and there's more research in this area, we're finding that there's actually a lot we can do proactively and preventatively, which is exciting. It's like with total hip replacements. They now, in Australia, they offer these people who are having a hip replacement, so they might be in their, later years, 70s, 60s, 70s, maybe earlier, maybe later, but they're now offering them prehab. So they're offering them a stint of strengthening and rehabilitation before they even have the surgery. So because they're finding there's better post-surgical outcomes. Yeah. So it's exciting because I think the statistics are sobering in terms of, according to the Australian Incontinence Foundation, 1 in 3 women who've had a baby have some type of incontinence, like leaking. 1 in 2 women have some type of prolapse. After having a baby, different stages of prolapse. So these stats are real. And I think in the past, we've not talked about them. This was an area you would never tell someone that you just leaked or you peed your pants when you laughed. You'd never say that. But luckily, these conversations, like what we're having today, they're here. So we're more aware of them, because during pregnancy, just even that awareness is knowledge, that awareness that, something's happening to my body and perhaps I don't need to just put up with it. I don't need to ignore it. Like there's something I can maybe do about it. Even that knowledge is amazing. So if you're listening today, and it's great.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. So true. And those numbers are scary. Like you're saying, I mean, we are talking about it, but wow, not enough that we realize that, hey, we're looking around a room of women who have had babies and there's a lot more of us having issues than we think. And to your point about prehab, I think it's so wonderful. Australia's clearly ahead of the curve when it comes to the US, although sometimes by default in the US, when it comes to surgeries like a hip replacement, like you're saying, the insurance companies won't approve your surgery without you trying other more conservative measures first. And so by default, you will have had some prehab because they will have told you go to physical therapy, see if that helps. So we are maybe getting that sometimes, but it's not like part of the protocol, if that makes sense. So just like it comes to, having a baby, I think a lot of people, when it comes to preconception, they'll think about, their diet, maybe starting a prenatal vitamin, maybe they want to lose weight beforehand, maybe they stop drinking as much. But I don't know if they're doing a whole lot of thinking about, the other physical stuff. So like in your experience, when someone's experiencing some aches and pains of pregnancy, there's a lot of things I think that have become normalized. Like, what would you say are some things that show up during pregnancy that are red flags or, could just be a sign of normal growing and whatnot?
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. Yeah, so I guess we're here today to talk about like aches and pains with whilst breastfeeding. So that question you ask in terms of what's normal with pregnancy, I could think there's two main areas that are probably easy to talk about. One is the pelvic health side of things, so the incontinence and prolapse. And I do have a free pelvic health checklist that is super easy if you'd like me to share it. It's a yes/no question box where you just go through all the questions. If you answer yes to any of the questions, then it's probably recommended you seek help, from your local healthcare team about that issue. So whether or not that's prolapse symptoms. So if you don't know what a prolapse is, you might notice it as a vaginal bulge or lump, pelvic heaviness, pelvic dragging sensation, the incontinence as we talked about, but there's some more subtle ones like painful sex, there's constipation. So there's a few other more subtle issues too that are red flags. And then there's the body aches and pains. So I think if someone's uncomfortable, whether or not you're pregnant or you've had your baby, don't put up with it. Like it's not fun being in pain, is it? Especially if you've got a newborn baby to look after and you're getting neck pain and shoulder pain, and perhaps it's going up into your head and you're getting headaches or you're having trouble sleeping. So if any stage, I guess there's stages. First of all, are there any self-management strategies that you can trial? And that's something I'm sure we'll get talking about today. But then if there's the self-management strategies aren't working, then definitely go and seek help. Life's too short to be in pain.
It really is. And I think, sometimes we're just told like, oh, well, that's just what happens when you're pregnant. And I'm asking about pregnancy because, what I think is happening is that these issues come up, they're ignored, and then they don't go away just because the baby came out. So maybe the baby growing in your body has, brought to light some things. But if you're not taking care of yourself, like you're saying, right, you're kind of letting those things continue or not doing something to work on them, well, then, postpartum, they're still there and they're showing up. But sometimes people are surprised, like, oh, well, ever since, I gave birth, I've had this. But then probably what you find out when you talk to people is, oh, well, maybe it's been going on for a little while, right? So, with the baby and labor, labor can look so many different ways, right? And just even from, what position you might be in to how long it is and what type of birth you've had and all the things. So, when it comes to postpartum, like I know one of the things I've always thought is interesting, and maybe it's slightly different in Australia, but, if you have a C-section, right, they want you up and walking right away. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is, obviously blood flow is key. We don't want you getting any blood clots, but it's helpful for healing tissues. I don't know that we're doing the same thing, at least in the US, for women who are having vaginal birth, though. And so is there, I guess, how much activity should we have early on in postpartum? Because, like you said, with breastfeeding or pumping, right, you're going to be sitting a lot. I don't think sitting is the best activity for our bodies, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh, you bring up so many good points. And it's not black and white. It's not an easy answer. So I do just want to, like, as you said, every situation is different. So, but on the whole, I feel in Australia, if you've had a cesarean birth, the doctors often say no driving for 6 weeks. Don't lift anything heavier than your baby for 6 weeks. And those two recommendations alone, I love. So let me explain why. If you're not driving, then you can't be hauling your pram in and out the car. You can't be taking the capsule in and out the car. So if they're really heavy, especially when there's a baby inside, if you're driving, you could be up for hours and hours. You know, you're standing, you're sitting, you're up against gravity. And after a vaginal birth, everything has stretched, up to 300%. Like that pelvic floor's stretched, everything's stretched to make way for the baby. It's like an elastic band. And we want that natural recoil to occur as much as possible. Does that make sense? So if your pelvic floor area, like all the openings around your pelvis, if they all stretch heaps, we want that natural recoil to occur. And if we're sitting and standing and we're up against gravity, you've got the weight of gravity and all your organs and your whole body sitting on top of your pelvic floor. So I think a really key tip for post-birth recovery, yes, we do want to get moving, absolutely, and that's really important. But we want to do it in short bursts, and we want to mix that up with horizontal rest, lying down, have a rest, put your feet up. So if you've been up and you've been walking around and breastfeeding and holding and settling your baby, okay, let's now offset that by lying down to take the weight off our pelvic floor muscles and your abdominals if you've had a cesarean, and let that natural recoil to occur. At 2 weeks after having a baby, I went for a walk to my local cafe to meet up with a friend. It was not a long walk. It was only a 15-minute walk. I thought, that's easy. I was walking an hour during pregnancy. Easy peasy. So I walked 15 minutes to the cafe, had a coffee, came home via the local supermarket, popped some bread and milk under my pram. And by the time I was walking home in that last 100 meters, I was about 3 hours after I set out. So 3 hours later, and I suddenly felt a massive heaviness through my pelvis, like pelvic heaviness, dragging sensation. And I said to my husband, I feel like I have a ton of bricks sitting on top of my pelvic floor. And I had no symptoms before that. I'd had no issues with prolapse. So the pelvic heaviness is that symptom of prolapse. So it was a big shock. And I thought, this is just from me doing too much. And, everything, as I said, is stretched that 300%. So everything's just flopped down even more in my pelvis, and I haven't given that recoil a chance. So I'd overdone it without knowing. So that horizontal rest. So going back to your question, what do we do after birth? Yeah, good question. I have the recommendation of 5 minutes of walking extra per week. So in the first week of walking, you might just do 5 minutes around the house, around the hospital, to the garden, just might be around the block. Just do 5-minute bursts. It doesn't mean 5 minutes the whole day and that's all you do, just 5-minute little bursts.
Bummer.
The next week 2 would be 10-minute bursts. Week 3, 15 minutes. Week 4, 20. Week 5, 25. So by the time you get to week 6, you're doing 30-minute walks, and you're mixing that up with your bursts of horizontal rest to help that pelvic floor recover.
I love that. Yeah. It's such a good reminder to be gentle, right? And just, and I think if anybody's ever had a major surgery, those are generally the same recommendations as well. And so, you just, frequent walking, right? We want to, have the body move, get some blood flow going, but then lay down and rest and all of those things. So, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the visual imagery we see a lot, or it's what's been in books or classes or what have you. But I mean, my goodness, I count on maybe one hand the number of times I realistically ever used this. When I had my office and I was seeing patients in person, I had this couch that the entire back of it folded down and basically turned it into a twin bed. And I bought that couch for appointments specifically because I think sideline breastfeeding is great. It's an awesome tool. Or laid back breastfeeding. I could recline the back of it or whatever. And I kid you not, definitely less than 5 times in all the years that I had that furniture in a couple of different office locations did I ever really use that. And I would try to encourage moms, but they wanted to sit up, right? And do, a cross cradle position, something like that, which I get, but I'm also like, it's just when you're at home though. So when I would do home visits, then a lot of times the appointment was in the mom's bed. And we would naturally just do that side lying position or some sort of laid back position and whatnot. So from your perspective, I'd love to hear what you think about the different breastfeeding positions out there, because, for us as lactation consultants, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, but I don't know, I think most of our consideration is, how far out postpartum are you? Did you have a C-section or not? And then kind of going with what the mom is, trying to get us to help her with.
Jacqueline, you took the words out of my mouth. That horizontal breastfeeding position, that, mums are busy. You're probably listening to me thinking, I've got a toddler. I've got a 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and newborn baby. How on earth am I going to lie down during the day? You're in some, creamy land. So that horizontal breastfeeding, that's it, isn't it? You've got your lying down rest and you're feeding. And I've had 3 babies. It wasn't till my 3rd baby. I could not master horizontal feeding for my first baby, for my 2nd baby. By the time it got to my 3rd, I thought, I have to do horizontal feeding because that's going to be the only opportunity to lie down and rest. And I actually had to ask the midwife in hospital, can you show me this? I've struggled. So it wasn't until I actually had to ask that to show me horizontal. And that's why it's so good you did home visits, because as you said, you're seeing someone in their natural environment. But it wasn't until my 3rd baby I finally mastered that horizontal breastfeeding, and it was a game changer. So good.
Yeah.
So good. Because once we've had a baby, we've touched on it a little bit, but birth is big. No matter if you've had a cesarean or a vaginal birth, your body has been through a lot. Plus you're dealing with fatigue and you're dealing with the weakness from birth. So perhaps during pregnancy, you hadn't been very active or fit or strong. You might have been nauseous. You might have been achy. You might have been busy working full time. So perhaps you had a reduced baseline, so to speak, to start off with. Then you put childbirth on top of that. Then you put the natural weakness that we have postpartum, as a result of birth. And the fact that we're breastfeeding for hours at a time, we're learning a new skill. So it's not surprising that we do get achy. So one of the top thing on that management list is, as you just said, horizontal. Walking is the main one, get your body moving, change that position. And then secondly, would have to be definitely see if you can master horizontal breastfeeding. And if you can't, see if you can get help to master it. And if you still can't, just keep persevering. Because it'll always be possible at some stage or other. It maybe, hopefully.
I'd like to believe so. And I can totally relate to what you're saying too. With my first, I could not master that horizontal breastfeeding till he was a lot older. I just felt as a newborn, he just didn't have the head control and what have you. With my second, from the moment I gave birth to her, we were breastfeeding laying down. And I don't know that it was even, I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that I was then a lactation consultant. I think it was just, I had breastfed before and I had some experience and I had a little more confidence about it, there wasn't anything special just because I was a lactation consultant, I promise. Because that's not even really something that I would say is included in our formal education. But when it comes to things like posture though, and we're thinking of that when it comes to breastfeeding, right? What are some of the do's and don'ts maybe? Because, I think we're so focused on the boob and the baby's mouth and our hands or something, but the rest of it isn't really something that moms are paying attention to. So just curious what you think about that.
So let's talk about the breastfeeding station, and I would be interested to hear your thoughts too, because I think my recommendations have changed and adapted over time and since having kids too. So textbook, traditional is, and look, there's a lot to be said for this. I think this traditional breastfeeding station, sitting is I think it's good when you're first learning a new skill. So first baby, first time you're breastfeeding. So a nice supportive chair. We're not talking about reclined sitting here or lying horizontal feeding. I think they're 2 different things. They're amazing. But if you're wanting to sit, from a physical perspective, let's start from the bottom to the top. Let's think about our feet up to our head. if you've got your feet on a footrest, that's going to tilt your pelvis and make you slump in your lower back because it naturally it pulls the hamstrings, it puts the hamstrings on stretch, so you're more likely to slump. So personally, I like to recommend, at least initially, feet on the ground, about that 90 degrees, knees and hips position, because then your pelvis is in a nice position and it's not slumped one way or the other. And then when it comes to what's happening with your arms, I like the elbows to be at 90 degrees and your arms resting relaxed by your side. So that means when it comes to the baby, we've got to get the baby high enough up to our breast so that we're not having to lean down to our baby. So that's where pillows and everything and it comes in, armrests, so that we're not having to physically hold our baby up to our breast. Because when we're physically holding the weight of our baby up to us, sure, it might start off with just a light weight, but trust me, after an hour, what was, and we'd say kilograms, what was 3 kilograms now feels like 10 kilograms. And that's when we start to feel aches and pains to our head and neck. But I know that's, getting in a perfect feeding position before you start a feed isn't always necessarily possible, especially when there's toddlers around. So I think, it's really interesting because for my third breastfeeding experience, I very rarely sat in my breastfeeding chair. I was on the floor. I was, as you said, like on the couch, lying down. I was in lots of different positions and postures, and it was for me so much better. But I'd learnt the skill of breastfeeding. Does that make sense? So I wasn't having to focus 100% of my attention on how to get the attachment and the latch and all the rest. So that's where I've adapted. My recommendations have changed a little bit. I think if you're really focused 100%, we need a bit more support in your body and to help. But then if we're more relaxed around the breastfeeding, the more we can move our body, the better, because we're not in one sustained position, and that's when you're more likely to get aches and pains. What are your thoughts on that, Jacqueline?
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I see that a lot of moms, when they're starting out learning how to get the latch going and all of that, if they're not in the right position, it can be so distracting or very difficult for them to get the right latch. So like you said, you're kind of setting yourself up for success when you have the pillows. I usually tell moms that the pillows are really there to support you more than your baby. Like you said, one's under the elbows, right? Or armrests or something like that. And then something high enough to support the baby so that you're not bearing the weight of the baby the whole time. I think those things are important. And then, everybody's, different sizes, different height, torsos. And so it's all individual. It's like people are like, well, what nursing pillow do you recommend? I don't, because maybe a nursing pillow is great for you. And then depending on your size and your baby's size, it would be this one, like, like you could probably get away with like throw pillows and bed pillows and stuff like that too, right? Or a folded up blanket, or, there's so many different options. So it's like, it's kind of just personal preference, right? That's like asking me like, what curtains should I hang in my living room? Depends on what you like. So
absolutely.
There's, some of that, right? But I agree. I think that once if you dedicate yourself to, getting that latch right, which you have lots of opportunities to practice in those early days, once you get the hang of it, then you can breastfeed in all of these different positions or while moving. And I think that's something that should be encouraged more. I have had so many clients and so many moms who have, they're 6 months and they're still like, the baby's hungry. And they go and they get to their breastfeeding chair with their boppy pillow or whatever pillow, and they sit down and they get the whole setup. And I'm like, but your baby is 6 months. Like, why are we still breastfeeding like they're a newborn? Like you could probably hold them with one arm and walk around and nurse them while you're getting the toddler a drink. Or you could, they're 6 months, they probably want to sit in your lap now, So I think that knowing that there's variation, right, that you should progressively get to a point of not needing to have the full setup every time. Because that makes breastfeeding cumbersome too. I think it's hard to stick with it long term if you feel like you have to do all these special things to make it happen.
Yeah. And I distinctly remember, I don't remember it for my first because that was all a blur, but my second and third, I always rejoiced when they got to the size where I didn't have to support them with my second arm and they could sit on my lap. And I just had to support them with the one. Like I was like, woohoo, I've got one hand free. Amazing. And I think another little tip there is no matter what stage of breastfeeding you are, once you're in position, once they're latched and they're feeding, is instead of getting the phone out straight away, taking a deep breath and doing a quick body scan from head to toe and having a quick think, okay, have I got any muscle tension in my body? Do a deep breath, think, how are my wrists? Are they feeling soft or am I clenching my fingers, like trying to hold on to my baby's head? Are my shoulders lifted up towards my ears? Can I just relax them down a bit? So just having that awareness of, okay, my baby's now feeding, I can take a deep breath. How's my body feeling? And I think that in itself can really help in reducing the muscle tension in our body.
Ooh, it's like a really good tip.
Yeah, and it's like, you know how sometimes when we're not feeling great, let's say a headache, for example, we've got a headache and we're perhaps the kids have gone to bed and you're sitting on the couch. And this is for me, like sometimes I think, oh, I've got a headache. And then you think, oh, I'm so tense in my neck and shoulders. And it's then that you think, oh, I can just actually drop my shoulders down and that really helps. And sometimes we're so caught up in it all, we can't reflect on our own body, which I totally get as a busy new mum. You know, you've got a few things happening. So that's a great little tip that I think everyone could utilize more.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And then, you know, when they're not feeding the baby, so, you know, you're doing something else, I don't know, you wake up in the morning, you're going to take a shower. You know, is there any kind of like stretching that's helpful or other things they can do?
Absolutely. So look, if you're actually sore and achy, I would encourage before the feed to, if you can, do a few stretches. And that might be as simple as a few shoulder rolls. So rolling your shoulders in each direction 10 times. And then also drop your neck, head down to your neck and get a beautiful neck stretch. You might lift your arms up over your body and stretch to one side. And I know this is a podcast, but here we are on a video call and I'm doing the stretches at the same time. So moving your body before a feed, then getting your baby feeding, and then after a feed too, doing the same thing. Do some shoulder rolls, do those neck stretches. Come and check out my Instagram page. I do have quite a few reels with some breastfeeding stretches. So if what I'm saying isn't making sense, check me out on at Fitness Mama. So yeah, stretching your arms one direction, other direction, up over your head. Yeah, you could do a rotation stretch where you put one hand on your opposite knee and look around to the side. So just some really simple, they don't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be time consuming, but some simple stretches just to get your body out of that sustained posture that it's been in whilst breastfeeding. So simple stretches before and after feed, amazing. Heat pack can also be really helpful. Look, if you are achy and sore, I wouldn't say it's a treatment option. Like it's not going to solve the issue, but just to help relieve any discomfort can be really helpful. So just simply pop a heat pack on before or after a feed as well. But then the number one tip, which you probably know what I'm going to say, but if you are achy and sore, is trying to address the underlying issues. And that is probably, without knowing you and without having assessed you, but it's probably the weakness that you've got as a result of birth. So the weakness in your abdominals, your core muscles, your back muscles, all those postural muscles. It's probably the weakness and also the stiffness as a result of breastfeeding and learning this new skill. And I'm a huge believer that every single woman who has a baby deserves some type of postnatal rehab. So we touched on it before. But as you said, if you have any surgery, a knee replacement, a knee reconstruction, you will be given a pretty good protocol for your rehab. You'll be given guidelines. Well, hopefully you're given guidelines as, like, if you're a professional sports person and you've had a knee reconstruction, you're not going to go straight back to playing football, you're going to go through a walking program, include some gentle run-throughs, include a strength training program at the gym. Eventually, you might start training with the rest of your teammates, and then eventually you might do a first quarter or a half. You wouldn't do a whole match on the field. Does that make sense? It's a very progressive situation, and this is what I wish and hope for all women who've had a baby. Again, it doesn't need to be complicated, but some type of step-by-step approach to their getting stronger. Because we've invested so much into our bodies with this pregnancy. We've put our bodies on the line to have our beautiful baby. We've now birthed our beautiful baby one way or another, and it's time to then reinvest back into ourselves, especially if you want to have future babies. But also, we're all approaching menopause. It's on our doorstep. And we talked about those statistics. 1 in 3 women who've had a baby have incontinence. 1 in 2 have prolapse. So I really do think this time of motherhood leading into menopause is a really beautiful time to, at some stage, reinvest back. And that's ultimately what will help with the aches and pains. Because if you're still weak and stiff, it doesn't matter how many gentle stretches you do or your breastfeeding posture, you're not addressing the root cause.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into what I wanted to ask next, which is, for lack of a better word, exercise, right, is kind of a catch-all. But, whether or not somebody had some sort of routine before birth or before pregnancy, or they're realizing, I should really start something because I do want to take good care of myself. There's a lot of people that just really kind of jump back into whatever they were doing before. And it's like, well, maybe we might need to modify it, like you said, or you ease yourself back into it, like your reference about the athlete. So, what are some things that moms should keep in mind when they're considering resuming, some regular exercise, strength building activities? Because I feel like they're being sold on a lot of different things, and just, get that personal trainer and go to the gym. Well, hopefully they're trained in postpartum, right? Like, hopefully you're not going to CrossFit right away or, so I just, there's so many it's a mixed bag. I don't even really know what to tell people.
Yeah. Look, I think this is one of the reasons I created my program, because there are a lot of postnatal programs out there that offer star jumps, like jumping jacks, and get back into running with no, proper process, like a couch to 5 kilometer. Do you have that in America? The couch to 5K run?
If we do, I'm not aware of it, but probably that sounds very American.
Just Google it, and it's like, oh, from couch to 5K, I can do that in 6 weeks. Awesome. And you follow this program. Like definitely. So it's a great question, Jacqueline. So you could be the strongest woman in the world, as I said before, but if you've just had a baby, everything's stretched. And it's not just the muscles we're talking about. The pelvic floor stretched 300%. That's all the fascia and the connective tissue. It's like when you eat a piece of steak, it's not all the red meat, is it? It's white. Sorry if you're vegetarian, but there's white sinew. There's white sinew bits, and it's not all the muscle. And that white connective tissue, you could be the strongest person in the world, but for that to knit over and heal over and recover, that needs time. Time is the best healer. So big step is to take your time and do it gradually. So not jumping back into anything too soon. I don't care if you're the strongest person out there, or if you had an amazing birth, or if you had a really strong pregnancy. You still need to start at a baseline and build it up. And then secondly, I think every single woman, we should all be working on our weakest link. And if we've had a baby, that's generally our pelvic floor and abdominal muscles for all of us. So I think no matter what program you do, incorporating pelvic floor and core. So for me and Fitness Mama, that's a Pilates-based program, lots of beautiful core strengthening that's appropriate to your stage of postpartum, in combination with what we just talked about and progressively getting stronger. I think they're the two main things to consider. So it's, again, not black and white. It depends on what you want to get back into doing and what your baseline is. But on the whole, we could all follow a bit more of a structured process process.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that because I think there's this foundation, right? Like no matter what you want to do, you're going to need to have a strong core. It is the center of your body. So if you want really strong legs, I don't think you're going to get those without addressing the core, right? Or even arms. The arms don't work in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the engine of the car. You could have the flashiest, best sports car in the world, but if it's got a bad engine or the engine's not filled with the proper fuel or engine hasn't been serviced lately, it's not going to go very far, or it might break down.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. We don't want you breaking down. And that's too, like, I think to your point about doing too much, we've seen this so many times as lactation consultants where, early on, moms will get like a case of mastitis, and it's always 99% of the time. So not always, but because they're doing too much. Like there's other reasons why it can happen for sure, but if it's happening in later stages postpartum, it's usually something else. But if it's been in that immediate postpartum period, you're doing too much and your body is stressed. And, I think there's, like you're saying, there's this repair going on. So, your body's busy, right? Like we don't need to give it more to do, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I am mindful of that. So here we are talking about, let's do more exercise. Let's do strengthening. But we have just had a baby, and that postnatal period, it is a fine balance. And this is where I say to my mums before every workout, I want you to feel rejuvenated and refreshed after this session today. I don't want you feeling exhausted or tired or sore. So for me and what I do inside my program, it's all about helping women feel better. So if you're exhausted and you're running off 4 hours sleep, you might not need like an hour-long walk isn't for you, but maybe 5 minutes of beautiful stretches and gentle exercises in the sunshine in your back garden might be really helpful in helping you feel better, because there is also a big correlation between physical health and mental health. And we haven't even touched on the mental health side of things today.
Well, this is perfect because that's where I wanted to start to talk about. So if you're listening today, I don't want you to be feeling overwhelmed and thinking, oh my God, there's even more I've got to do now that I've had my baby. I want you all to think, what would be easy to do? What would help me feel better? Is it 5 minutes of beautiful stretches whilst my baby lies next to me and kicks on their playmat? Like what feels easy? Because if we can make it feel easy, then you're more likely to be consistent and you're more likely to put those building blocks into place to build the brick house. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if we're trying to do, okay, I've got to find a babysitter so that I can drive to the gym, do an hour class and drive home again. Like, it's just hard. It feels hard for me. Like, so what fills you with joy and what depletes you? And I think at this stage, we need to be careful we need to love our bodies. We need to nourish ourselves and our souls. So yes, take away the overwhelm and what feels easy. What could you do consistently today? So absolutely. You basically answered my question. So that was awesome. Because I think what people get into is this idea of, okay, I'm going to set this goal, but then they're miserable on the way to achieving that goal because it's not appropriate for them or they're not consistent with it. And so now instead of it being like positive for their mental health, they're sort of beating themselves up. What's wrong with me? Or why can't I just, stay on target? Or, I'll never have time to do this because I can't get the babysitter. Like, we don't want you going down that road. No, that's where it becomes
a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's not beneficial for your mental health. So
no.
Yeah, you just basically gave all the perfect strategies for making it something beneficial.
Aim for 5 minutes, but 5 minutes of quality exercises, it can make a big difference to how you're feeling physically and mentally. And then the next day, sure, you might be able to do 10 minutes. Amazing. One day you might even be able to do a whole half hour. And then the next day you might be back to 5 minutes. But you know what? That's okay. And this is the phase of life, the season of motherhood. So I think, and that was a big transition for me, because my idea of exercise used to be going for an hour-long walk with a friend or going to the gym and, on the way back from the gym, I'd pop into the supermarket to buy a nice, healthy, nutritious dinner. On the way home, I'd have a shower. And so like it would be a good 2 to 3 hours. And that whole notion of what exercise to me was, it came crashing down as soon as I had kids, and I had to adapt it and change it and realize that, okay, I'm doing this workout at home with my toddler next to me, but they're having fun and I'm sort of having fun, and we're all having fun together. And sure, it might not be the perfect workout, or it might not be 100% of what I would have done, but I might have only done 50% of exercises, but at least I'm doing something. And so for me, that was a big transition, and it's going to look different for everyone. Some of you might love home workouts. Other ones, if you're listening today, you might prefer something totally different. So just finding what lights you up with joy, I think it doesn't even have to light you up with joy. Just something that you can do easily, because afterwards we generally feel better, don't we?
Usually, yes, right? You're usually like, oh, I'm so glad I did that,
And if you don't feel better, because sometimes I do remember I was feeling so exhausted and I did something and then I felt even worse. And I think we need to pay attention to those times, because we don't want to repeat them. Can we adapt it? Could we change it? Do less, do something different?
I agree. And I think there's so many lessons of like what you're saying when I think about like my recent surgery that I had, where, like the nurses would say, like, listen to your pain, use your pain as a guide, right? Like pain is not gain. And, somebody came up with that, some man came up with that a while ago. And like, that is not the goal. And I even think too, we've sort of convinced ourselves like it depends on what your goals are and what stage of life you're at, like you said, but this whole idea of like, you should feel sore after a workout. Well, it depends on what you're trying to do, because if we're talking about postpartum moms, I don't know that I love the idea of them feeling sore after a workout, like, do we want that or not?
Even now, my youngest is 5. And if I'm sore after a workout and I can't squat down onto the ground to play with her, it's just annoying. Like, I like to be able to still be a mum and manage my everyday activities. Like, I don't have to be so sore that I can't walk down the stairs. Like, that's no fun.
Right? Yeah, that's a good point. How are you going to really care for this baby if you're super sore? Which kind of makes me think of another thing too, because, there's a lot with just, outside of breastfeeding in terms of, picking the baby up and laying the baby down and doing tummy time and all of those things, right? Like there's a lot of things our bodies are doing. So I found that there were times postpartum for me, and I've seen this with so many moms, where we might be slowing down and moving a lot less, but then there's other times where we're moving a lot more. Like, especially, let's say you had like an office job and then, you had the baby and now you're taking this break from work, or maybe you're not going back. You might be moving more than you ever have. So I don't know. I think maybe that deserves to be like taken into account if you're doing these daily movements, right? That, you're up and about maybe more than you would have been otherwise before a baby. So I would say that counts. Do you think that counts for exercise?
Well, that's incidental. Absolutely. That's incidental exercise, and it's really important exercise. But we still, I think, no matter what you're doing, you do just need to have in the back of your mind, am I focusing on my weakest links? Like, what's been affected with birth? And as we said before, it's a pelvic floor and core. So I think, that's great. You're moving more and you're more, doing more incidental exercise. Brilliant. But do we need to complement that with just a couple of exercises to help rehab those important muscle groups? Abdominals, pelvic floor.
Yeah.
They've stretched big time.
Oh, it's so true. They're so important. I don't think, we can talk enough about it. And, just if there were maybe like, if it's one thing, maybe it's 3 things, any of your like kind of just top tips for moms who either are, newly postpartum, maybe they're, a little ways into it, but they're really thinking about, gosh, I need to focus on my body and that side of wellness a little bit more. Like, where should they start? What are the things they should focus on? You mentioned core and pelvic floor, but other things that you would recommend?
Yeah. Look, the fact that you're thinking about this is the first step, because that's brilliant. I think and it's why it's great to chat. Some countries offer a free pelvic floor assessment to women 6 weeks postpartum. I know France does it. I think UK does it. I'm not sure. But if you can and you've got the means to go and have a pelvic floor assessment, amazing. And a lot of some of these, again, it depends which country you're in, but I know in Australia with our public health system, if you've got concerns with leaking and prolapse, you can go on the public wait list. So investigate, go and chat to your doctor and see if you can get that pelvic floor assessment. It's something I wish all women were offered or had the opportunity. I really do think, incontinence costs our government billions of dollars every year, as we age. And I think if it's something we can get onto sooner rather than later, amazing, and for quality of life too. So that would be my first tip is, if in doubt, check it out with your pelvic floor. Second one was get yourself a bit of an action plan. Get your partner on board. It might be as simple as going for a walk around the block when they get home from work, or just, work out what feels easy for you and start off there. So that would be my second big tip. And the third one is just understand that there will be fluctuations, life changes. Some weeks will be harder, some weeks will be easier. Don't be hard on yourself. Like, this is the flow of motherhood, and one step forwards at a time. Like, it's amazing. You're doing such a great job.
I love that. Oh, so true. So true. And I think your first tip is actually really, really important because, in the United States where people might have health insurance, if you have private insurance, and then depending on what state you might live in, if there is a medical indication, usually it's not preventive that you'll get that coverage of getting your pelvic floor checked out. But if you're suspecting a prolapse or incontinence or something like that, like you said, asking your doctor if they can, make that referral. And as long as there's a medical sort of problem that they can list and say, this is why I'm recommending this person for it, you might get it covered, which is really, really cool. So don't neglect that part of your health. I love that. Well, you are just a wealth of information and support. And I love your perspective because it's not like, it's just refreshing, right? Where it's not like, you can get your body back 6 weeks after having the baby.
Yeah. Do you notice we haven't talked about body weight once? And I love it. Like, it's not about, there's so many more important things. So absolutely.
So many. Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the show, Kath. And yes, we have your information linked up in the show notes. Check out her Instagram. She mentioned she's got some really great reels over there to share. She's got a wonderful program that you can check out. And then that checklist as well that you mentioned, we'll have that linked up in the show notes. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for chatting, Jacqueline. It was an absolute pleasure. And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Jacqueline and myself at fitnessmama.com/podcast. And if you have that pregnant friend or a friend who's recently had a baby, don't forget to consider sharing this podcast with them to help them on their journey. That's it, ladies. Have an amazing week, and we'll catch you soon for another episode of the Fitness Mama Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama Podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at FitnessMama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.